All right, these notes are over biomolecules. And remember, biomolecules are not necessarily molecules that are alive, but they are what all living things are made out of. And they can also be called organic molecules or macromolecules. For these notes, you need to be writing down anything that is typed in red. Anything that's not in red, you don't need to worry about. All right, first off, biomolecules are complex organic molecules, and they're important components of all living things. Organic in science class means a little bit of a different thing than organic in the grocery store means. In science class, organic just means that the molecule has carbon in it and it's bonded to hydrogen. Most living things, all living things are all made mostly out of carbon. Organic at the grocery store just means that a plant or a vegetable or fruit or something was just grown without pesticides or grown in a responsible way. So not the same thing as in science. And organic just means with carbon. A monomer is one molecule by itself. You can see this monomer down here. These dots would be different atoms that are bonded together to make a molecule, and just one molecule is a monomer. Mono just means one. If you've ever seen the Planters Peanut guy, he's got his top hat and his cane and a little monocle. It's just one lens for his glasses. So that kind of helps me remember mono just means one. A polymer would be if you had this one molecule and you had a repeating pattern of the same molecule, that would be called a polymer. Just like a polygon has multiple sides. So mono just means one, poly means many, bonded together. Carbohydrates. Our main use for carbohydrates are for short-term energy. Most of our meals that we eat, whether they're fruits or vegetables, bread, pasta, grains, whenever we eat them, we get a whole bunch of energy from them, but it's just short term. Usually after you eat your carb-heavy meal, you're still hungry again just a few hours later. You still have to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So our body burns through carbohydrates pretty quickly, and then we have to replace that energy later. So that's why we call it short term. We also have to be able to recognize the shape of this carbohydrate molecule. And you'll notice it's in a ring. It's not a perfect circle, but it just kind of loops back on itself. And different carbohydrates have different sized rings. Some of them can be a bigger ring than this guy, or even if it was just a triangle, so long as it loops back on itself, that would be a ring. Sources of carbohydrates are plants, like your fruits and vegetables, starchy vegetables like potatoes, and also grains that can be put together to be like bread or pasta. Those are all good sources of carbohydrates. And also glucose, sucrose, you'll see fructose, high fructose corn syrup. Anything with this OSE ending just indicates that it's a sugar, which is a carbohydrate. The elements that are in a carbohydrate are just carbon is the C, hydrogen is just H, and oxygen is O. And you can see in this ring, the only types of elements that we have are just carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. A monomer of a carbohydrate is called a monosaccharide. Saccharide just means sugar. So this just means one sugar. So that would be like a simple carbohydrate. And your body would be able to use that pretty quickly. And a polymer of a carbohydrate is called a polysaccharide. And remember, those are those complex carbohydrates that it takes your body a little more energy to be able to burn off. But there's also a higher energy payoff. So things like starches and cellulose are polymers of a carbohydrate. And just FYI, cellulose is what plants build their body, if you will. out of. Cellulose is used to build like the leaves or the stems or the roots of a plant. Plants go through photosynthesis. They get their energy from the sun to build a sugar molecule, and then they can kind of link those all together into a polymer and build their bodies out of it, and that would be cellulose. These are some examples of different carbohydrate molecules. You can see we've got this one ring here. Since there's just one, we would call that a monosaccharide, and glucose is an example of that. Sucrose has two sugar molecules linked together. They're bonded together to form a bigger molecule, and that would be called a disaccharide, which is a type of polysaccharide. Di just means two. So this would be a monosaccharide. Again, this would be a polysaccharide or a disaccharide if there's just two. And this here would be a long polymer of a carbohydrate. You see a long chain. Each one of these rings is its own sugar molecule, but when it's linked together, it's a polymer. Lipids are insoluble in water. That just means that they're not going to mix in water. And some sources are like fats, oils, and waxes. If you try to mix any of these in water, they're just going to separate back out. They repel water. And we use lipids in our body for energy storage. Let's say you ate too many carbohydrates and your body has so much that it just can't burn it all off. Your body would go ahead and store that as a lipid or as fat on your body. And they're also used for protection and insulation. If you think about whales or seals or like polar bears, they have a lot of fat on their body, lipids, and that's so that they can stay warm in their freezing environment that they live in. The shape of a lipid molecule is like a zigzaggy chain. It does not loop on itself at all. But it also has the same elements that a carbohydrate does. It still just has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But again, since it doesn't loop back on itself, it would be a chain, and that's how you could tell it's a lipid. A monomer of a lipid is called a fatty acid, and a polymer, a steroid is an example of a polymer, and a phospholipid is another example. And we'll go way more into phospholipids later. Here's an example of a monomer of a lipid. See how it's just one chain by itself? This also would be a monomer of a lipid. But if you put a bunch of these together, you've got 3 chains, 4 chains all together. That would be a polymer of a lipid. Our bodies use protein in order to grow and repair tissue. Remember, tissue is just made out of cells. So anytime you need to build new cells in your body, you have to have proteins to build them out of. Think about people who are trying to bulk up at the gym. They have like a high protein diet. They would drink like protein shakes or eat protein bars so that they can bulk up and make those new muscle cells. So anytime you're trying to get new types of cells or repair damaged ones, you need protein. The shape of a protein, you just have a long chain, just has a nitrogen in this chain here. Sort of like lipids. Lipids was also in a chain, but the only difference is that there's nitrogen in a protein. Some sources are meat, beans, nuts, and soy. And again, we've got almost the same elements, except we've also got nitrogen. Sometimes you'll see a sulfur, most of the time you won't, but you will definitely see a nitrogen in these proteins. A monomer of a protein is called an amino acid, and a polymer, I know it's kind of hard to see down here, this says a polymer is a protein. So protein is like a long chain of amino acids all linked together. So protein is a polymer already. And here's the structure of a protein. You can see it's still a chain, and we've got a nitrogen in it. All right, last one, nucleic acid. Stores cellular information. That's our genes, our genetic information. And nucleic acids have 3 parts. notice there's this ring that's a sugar. So it's got a sugar plus a nitrogen base and a phosphate. And you can see the elements here. We've got carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, just like in everything else. It's also got nitrogen, and there will definitely be a phosphate as well in these nucleic acids. And nucleic acids, the Na, that is what the DNA stands for, is deoxyribose. You can see the deoxyribose in this sugar. And then the Na is for nucleic acid. So DNA is just a type of nucleic acid, as opposed to RNA. RNA would be like ribose only, so it would be ribonucleic acid. Every single cell ever, always, will have DNA in it. That's the instructions to build the cell in the first place. So every single cell has DNA in it. A monomer of DNA is called a nucleotide. So this guy here all together would be called a nucleotide. And whenever we link these nucleotides together, it forms a polymer called DNA or RNA. And that's it. Those are our 4 biomolecules that we need to know the structure and the function of.